Well, with Junior Dos Santos out of his main event against Alexander Volkov for Russia early on in November, a lot of people figured that the UFC would find another ranked heavyweight to get in there with Volkov, or they would just move the fight back to a later date. One thing I sure as hell didn't expect, and I don't think anyone else expected, was for Greg Hardy, of all people, to get put into this fight to fight against Alexander Volkov. So for Hardy, it's funny because in the podcast that I had a couple of days ago, I mentioned with Hardy that one of the possible benefits of him getting his win turned into a no contest is that when you keep winning, especially like Greg Hardy has, and especially with the microscope on him, you could potentially end up getting rushed and get put against a fighter who's significantly better than you to the point where you're getting derailed a little bit too quickly. And I was thinking, okay, well, now that he doesn't have the win on his record, maybe that can slow things down for him and help him keep moving along a slow build. His striking's looking a little bit better, but it still isn't great. He's still throwing one punch at a time. At times, he's keeping his hands down. Not exactly showing me anything great from a grappling standpoint. So you're seeing a lot of room for improvement for him. And you're thinking, okay, well, hey, if he can keep getting a slow build, if he can keep fighting guys who are on the lower end of a really shallow division at heavyweight, then eventually he can get to the point where he's finally ready to move up, face the top guy, and then actually make it competitive. Well, so much for a slow build. He's getting 3 weeks now, and he will be fighting against Alexander Volkov, who at the time of his last fight was probably a fight or two away from getting a title shot. So this goes from being just like dipping his toes into the top 15 to fighting a guy who at one point was a top 5 guy. And man, a couple things about this. First off, I need to see what the betting line is, and whatever it is, even if Volkov is like a plus or like a minus 1,000 favorite, like I'm still probably going to put a lot of money on it because I just don't see how Hardy's going to win. If Hardy does win, though, there's a story to be told here that if it gets told right, it could just revolutionize heavyweight MMA. And what that story would be is that you could take someone who's a great athlete from a sport like football or from the NFL, give him 3 years, and within that amount of time, he'll be beating top-ranked former. I guess he wasn't technically a title contender, but former top-ranked guys at the heavyweight division that quickly. And in a sport like football, where players often enter the league at 21 or 22, and the average career doesn't last over 4 years, so you got a lot of guys who are great athletes who, by the time they're 25, are looking for the next thing to do, who've been athletes their whole life. If you can say, hey, in 3 years, Greg Hardy was able to do it, maybe you could do it too and get to the top of the UFC and be making good money every fight, we could start seeing an actual migration of like former NFL players coming over to the UFC, like in a quantity that's much higher than what we've had before. Yes, we've had a couple of former NFLers try to get into MMA, and Greg Hardy is a good example of one who actually made it to the UFC and is doing decently well. But if he can knock off a guy like Volkov after this little experience, if that story is told properly, you could get a lot of just high level athletes from other sports who see their careers ending in that sport, who decide to make the transition over. And I mean, if I've been saying there's a big lack of depth at heavyweight, but if it's that bad, then Hardy could potentially set a precedent that leads a lot of other top guys from other sports to come over. And boy, it could really change heavyweight MMA in the course of like 5 years or so if that's the case. Now, that being said, do I think this is going to happen? Absolutely not. I don't see how Hardy's able to win this fight. I guess technically it's heavyweight. Everyone's got a puncher's chance. So sure, Hardy's got a puncher's chance. The thing is with a guy like Volkov isn't the kind of guy where he's a high ranked. It's not like a Curtis Blades situation where Curtis Blades, he's probably going to try to wrestle him. And hey, you never know. While coming in, you might run into something. I'm not saying I would take Greg Hardy over Curtis Blades. I'm just saying that at least with that, like you could see there being some areas where there'd be trouble for Curtis Blades, or there could be trouble. Again, don't get me wrong here. I would pick Curtis Blades and throw a ton of money on him over Greg Hardy as well. But with Volkov's a long heavyweight who likes to strike and is very effective at mixing up levels, mixing up to the body, to the head. Has a handful of really nice knockouts against some really good guys, including Fabricio Verdum, although that one ended up finishing on the ground. Although if he gets Greg Hardy to the ground, Hardy is in big trouble. But Volkov doesn't even really need to get him there to cause him problems. He can do plenty of work on the feet. So to me, just the difference in striking between these two guys is just astronomical. And I just see Volkov picking Hardy apart. If we look back at Volkov's record and how he got to this fight, unfortunately for him, his last fight was the infamous hot balls fight where he had 2 rounds in the bag and pretty much 14 minutes in the bag against Derek Lewis before he gets knocked out at the end. So for him, he beats Verdum. He's undefeated in the UFC up to this point. Like he's first fought Timothy Johnson, beat him, beat Roy Nelson, beat Stephen Struve, beat Fabricio Verdum. And then with a win over Lewis, which he almost had, he's in the driver's seat. If not for a title shot, he's probably at least one fight away. And I'm trying to think what the timing was on this. I don't remember Actually, no, yeah, this is the fight that got Derek Lewis a title shot. So Lewis won this fight and got a title shot. So in theory, had Volkov been able to finish off the final minute there, he might have been facing off against Daniel Cormier instead of Derek Lewis there. So he was that close to getting to a title shot. Ended up getting caught at the end though, and outside of that, it would have been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-0. Would have been 5-0 in the UFC. Now he's 4-1 in the UFC, and he's got a fight with Greg Hardy. If you look back at some of his other fights though before the UFC, just for some interesting names here, he did have a decision loss to Czech Congo and a split decision loss to Tony Johnson. But beat Bulgoy Ivanov, which is a pretty good win. Had a loss to Vitaly Minikov back when he was Bellator champion. But interesting fight on the record here is Brett Rogers, who in some ways you can say there's some similarities between him and Greg Hardy. Neither of them are very good grapplers, both in the hit with a lot of power. I would take Strikeforce Brett Rogers over Greg Hardy any day, though. At least Strikeforce Brett Rogers threw multiple punches at a time, whereas Greg Hardy just kind of picks you apart one punch at a time and doesn't really throw a whole lot of volume. And in not throwing volume, he doesn't really set up a lot of bigger shots either. It's just that in the wins that he's had, he's fought guys who would feel his power, get scared of him, and then just pretty much do whatever they could to get out of there without taking too much damage. But Volkov isn't going to be that kind of guy. Volkov is not going to back away. Volkov's faced other guys who have a lot of power. Derek Lewis obviously is known for having a lot of power. Volkov is in there with him and doing well for the first 14 and a half minutes. So I don't see Volkov cowering against Greg Hardy. I see him just taking center and picking Hardy apart, landing a bunch of body shots. And to me, if this isn't the first time that Greg Hardy's finishing his career, I'd be shocked. So again, wait until the odds come out. Once the odds do come out, I don't see the public betting the line in favor of Greg Hardy. I don't see it ever moving into a better line than what you're going to get right off the bat. So once you see the odds for Volkov, even if it's like 10-1 where he's a favorite, like how long does it take to get like a 10% return on your interest if you put your money in a bank? Like it's going to be hard to get a rate like that. So if you got to throw your money on Volkov and just get it overnight over the course of 3 weeks, however long it takes between now and their fight, I think it's a pretty good investment. Yeah, there's always the risk, especially with heavyweight MMA, that Greg Hardy might land the one big shot and pull off a major upset and potentially change the landscape of heavyweight MMA for the future. But I just don't see it happening. I see Volkov just running right through him. Hardy wasn't ready. Hardy just isn't ready for this kind of a fight right now. Puncher's chance is all he's got, but technically he's way out. Just everywhere that this fight could go, Volkov has the edge. Volkov's got the edge in wrestling. He's got the edge in jiu-jitsu. He's got the edge in striking, obviously. Just Hardy might have a power edge, but I just don't see it being enough. I just see Volkov tearing him apart here.